Okay, good evening. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the United Nations. I do a very similar presentation when I do ninth grade, uh, Modern America, Current Global Issues, when I have sections of that. And of course, when I do my presentation to the United Nations kids, the Model UN kids. Some of you have heard this a few times, so you should, get rid of this. I decided, because I have this beautiful background here, to videotape myself versus talk to a PowerPoint, and I feel like I can be more dramatic when I do that. Dramatic. So here we go. The United Nations. It is truly the progressive, liberal ideal of FDR to end the atrocities of World War II by establishing some good out of something so evil. This is extremely similar to the other progressive, liberal Woodrow Wilson. Both of these men, with the League of Nations and the United Nations, wanted to create some sort of mechanism, apparatus, so the world can come together and in a way humanely deal with political, economic, social, religious issues. Have a platform where everybody can get up, speak their mind, sit back down, they can deal rationally. Now, with the League of Nations, the real concept was everybody's equal, there is no leadership, everybody's going to get pulled into conflict to make sure that those few nations, let's just say a modern North Korea, don't get out of hand. Well, when a few members of the League of Nations started getting out of hand, the rest of the League of Nations was inept to actually act on it. Act on it. You can condemn all you want, but with the League of Nations, they weren't doing anything. That's partially because there wasn't a strong power structure to the League of Nations. There wasn't mechanisms and apparatus. Is that the word? I don't know. So, we weren't even part of the League of Nations, just to put that as a great example. And the goals of Great Britain and France were to appease to make sure there's no additional World War II. Now we have 1944-45, and FDR is coming to see the end of World War II, and unfortunately his own demise, and this is his priority. This is his baby. He's determined to get at Yalta, to get Stalin to join this organization. He's even willing to give up, Eastern Europe, just so that he knows that in the end, Stalin will come and play nice at the table with the Cold War emerging. All right, so in my opinion, the United Nations was founded from a progressive liberal standpoint to do two real things. One is touchy-feely, the other one is a little bit shadier. Number one, the UN was to create peace and stability around the world. Peace by making sure people don't use war as a means of diplomacy, and stability to make sure that the world sits at a table and talks about boundaries and borders and water rights and by today's standards, HIV/AIDS and water in North Africa and the Middle East, religious tensions around the world. So people can come together and even negotiate mineral rights at the bottom of the Arctic and who actually controls Antarctica. And there is even resolutions in the UN about who controls parts of space. Now that's the nice thing. That's the thing that we think we all want about the United Nations. Table of brotherhood mentality. The other part is, unlike the League of Nations, the United Nations will have some sort of hierarchy. There will be people in charge. The people in charge of this hierarchy are the most powerful and the most stable, I'm calling the Soviet Union stable, of powers. And so they're also the victors of World War II, who feel justified to be able to call the shots in a post-World War II world. Okay, so a little bit. At the top of the United Nations is a figurehead, a secretary-general, secretary-general. Today's secretary-general is Ban Ki-moon. Ban Ki-moon of South Korea no real power, has no power such like a president or a prime minister. He's a figurehead. He's the guy who's going to gavel sessions together. He's going to, wave. We do need a figurehead like that because it's kind of a shout out to where the UN is focused. For example, Ban Ki-moon is very big on that whole global warming is bad thing. So that means he's going to promote ideas and solutions that are tied to that. And obviously the world supported him when they voted him into the Secretary General position. And besides the Secretary General position, there is the General Assembly. The General Assembly is not hard to understand. Everybody in the UN gets to sit down as equals, each with one vote. Now, what the General Assembly votes on, all 180 some members, is really nothing. They don't have the power to vote on resolutions to go to war with member states. So just imagine, there's 180 some members of the UN. Notice I'm being vague because that number could change in the future. These member states break up into committees, and they're on a variety of committees, from human rights to disarmament to social humanitarian concerns. We can go on and on and on. In these committees, they come up with resolutions which are nothing more than ideas and solutions they think could work. So just imagine there is water rights issues in Sahara Africa. I know, hard to understand that. So what the UN might do in one of its committees is come up with a solution on how to deal with water rights in Sahara Africa. Member states are given the resolution. Here's our idea. This is what we think could help you. We've agreed to help you if you want our help. And that's the end of conversation. If Sahara Africa wants to abide by those resolutions, if they want to adopt some of those ideas, then there they go. But they don't have to. The GA is much like the League of Nations in its weak ability to be an authority figure. I'm drumming. That's the Security Council. That's who steps in as this hierarchy, as this apparatus to make sure that things get done per, hopefully, the majority of what the UN wants. So, the Security Council initially was 11 countries, now it's 15. The idea is some countries get to sit on a special council and they get to decide what gets enforced. So in a way, the Security Council is the executive branch of the United Nations. Now, 5 of the 15 today, or 5 of the 11 back in 1945, 5 of them are victors of World War II who felt that they should have a greater amount of power. They're the world's enforcers. They're the only ones in position to enforce. They do have some similarities with each other, but not even all of them have similarities. Here they are. The United States, Great Britain. Obviously, they're going to be on that. All the way stemming back to the Atlantic Charter, these two countries have decided to unite nations together. France, let's just say their little sister, sorry, China. Now, China in 1945 was a victor of World War II. It was a pro-U.S. ally in 45. Remember, from 45 to 49, they were in their own state of civil war. We were supporting Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist regime, the Kuomintang. To be honest, we were tied to a quasi-dictatorship that was in the middle of its own communist revolution. Now, the communists do win out. And then eventually in the 70s, we recognized communist China's right to sit on the Security Council. But that's number 4, China. Number 5, as bad as it sounds, it was good. The 5th member of the Security Council, the 5th member to have power like this, is United Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, the Soviet Union. This is a good thing. As much as everybody thinks they're, under Stalin, even under Khrushchev, this is a dirty, hands-dirty regime. I got to tell you, it creates the European concept of a balance of power. Now I'll explain why. The Security Council has the power to wage war, dictate trade, economic sanctions, and send peacekeepers. Power. Wage war, economic sanctions, that's relegating trade, and what was that last one? Send peacekeepers. That's a lot of power that the GA can't do. Individual member states can't do. You have to do it as a United Nations, and the Security Council grants that ability. Now, there's that number 5, the Soviet Union, as evil as it sounds. But here's the balance of power. The Security Council can, these 5 members, they're called permanent members. They're always on the Security Council. They don't get voted on or off. And besides being permanent members, they all have veto status, which means if the United States wants to do something, the other 3 like it. The Soviet Union has the ability to veto it, get rid of it, squash it. This goes back to that 1800s concept of balance of power. As long as the powers are balanced, you're not going to have a World War III. Yay! You got to even look at it as the United Nations is part of the reason why the Cold War went out with a whimper and not a bang. Now, it's not the only reason. Good presidential leadership, rational Mikhail Gorbachev. But I just wanted to say that the United Nations was part of that. Now, the UN has waged war in its 60-year time span. I'm getting comfortable here. It has waged war. The best example by far is the Korean War. The United States was part of the United Nations Security Council's decision to push back the North Koreans who invaded South Korea. So look at it this way. North Korea was an aggressor state, so the UN voted to support the country that had been invaded. The exact same thing happens in 90-91. In 90 to 91, the Persian Gulf War, surprisingly, in the Persian Gulf, you have Saddam Hussein who invaded Kuwait. The United Nations voted, Security Council voted, to use military force to drive Saddam Hussein's Iraqi regime out of Kuwait. Not get rid of Saddam Hussein, but get rid of Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi regime from Kuwait. Now, for those who did not know, why in the world would the Soviet Union support the Korean War? Well, actually it didn't, and this is just a stupid little funny thing, but because Mao Zedong in 1949 won the Communist Revolution, he was now the leader of mainland China. Well, we didn't seat, the GA, the Security Council, didn't seat Mao Zedong's communist regime of mainland China as the official China. We still sat Chiang Kai-shek, the nationalist regime, which at that time had fled and were living on the island of Taiwan. Taiwan called the Republic of China. We'll get to that later. So that means France, Great Britain, China, and the US, all to save South Korea. The Soviet Union in 1949, 1950 was boycotting the Security Council. So when it came down to a vote, the UN Security Council did vote without anybody to veto it, the military force to protect South Korea from North Korea. And eventually it worked. And actually it's a beautiful exemplar of containment. It was a limited war, stopped there at the 38th parallel. The UN, the US knew additional extension of conflict would only drive into a greater likelihood of World War III. I mean, it did almost happen with the Chinese coming over the border, over the Yalu River to attack MacArthur's forces. Off topic. Okay, so in the last few minutes here, I also want to let you know that the United Nations also took a very big, heavy hand on the 1950s and 60s decolonization process. They were always about the end of imperialism, which kind of goes all the way back to one of the 14 points. Get rid of imperialism. And that is why at one time we had 50 members of the United Nations GA, and now we have 100 and I think it's 193. I might have been saying 180 earlier. I'm tired. So, countries around the world partially benefited from the natural end of imperialism, how hard it was to be imperialistic, but also by the efforts of the international community to say it's over. And the trusteeship held a lot of land. The UN is partially the reason why there was a partition with Israel and Palestine. I do find there is issues with the UN. The UN has had a hard time enforcing what it wants to get done. The United Nations Security Council did not vote for the most recent war in Iraq starting in 2003. The United States did that with about 50 of its allies. So the United States did not act unilaterally, but you got to admit the United States didn't act with the United Nations. So obviously the United Nations is powerless, because what is it going to do? Stop the United States from doing what it wants to do? In terms of war, it is legal for the United States to wage war on Canada if it is directly threatened by Canada. In fact, it's even legal for the United States to preemptively strike Canada if the Mounties are, along the border. But what happened back in 2002-03 is that Colin Powell, the United States administration, could not convince our great allies on the Security Council that there was enough direct threat. And with the fact that we were not persuasive enough, some of these hands over there in the Security Council had some dirty hands with Iraq anyway, as they were already buying and selling with Saddam Hussein's wicked regime. Today, there are 15 members of the Security Council. 10, they rotate. 5 are permanent members. Brazil and Germany and Japan and India, economic powerhouses in their own right, are not always on the Security Council, though I think Germany and Japan have been on it a lot recently. Out of respect from their own regionals, they kind of say, Japan needs to be on it or whatnot. I think India might even be on it right now. Okay, so this is just a little bit of a lesson on the UN, but do put it in the picture of after World War II, we decided to unite a war so we don't have the rise of nationalism, Nazism, that happened. The ubernationalism is one of the reasons why entities like the NATO and the EU and the UN and ASEAN have all come to be. It's working as groups collectively to smack down individual bad actors. All right, I'm at 18 minutes. I hope this makes some sense. Take care. Bye now.